we are going to be talking to self-publishing in comics Bad Ink Studios about their comic Interdimensional and what else is coming up. And I'm going to bring them in right now. Lydia Roberts and Evan Schultz, welcome to Fresh Take. Thanks for joining us.
Hey.
Thank you so much for having us. This is awesome.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So we're going to be looking at some powers of Interdimensional a little bit later, and kind of getting into your thought process as you create. But just introduce yourselves to our audience. How did you guys? What's kind of your backstory? How did you start working together? You met in high school, I think, right?
We actually kind of met in like third grade, which is funny. But we were like
we were like 8 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, right on.
Super young. But then we happened to go to school together again in like middle school, high school, and ended up making a comic book together at that point, which was
Okay. Like we were like the two kids who liked comics, right? Like I don't think there was anybody else who was like a real comic book fan at our school at the time.
Yeah, I mean, our school wasn't like massive too, but I forget, we had an art field trip that saw like a bizarre art show called like Art Grotesque, and they had Crum's placemat drawings, and they had what was it? Charles Burns.
Didn't they have Charles Burns stuff there?
Yeah, his Black Hole comic, and Gary Panter's Jimbo in Purgatory, and I was just like, I had no idea this could be so weird.
What year roughly are we talking about?
That was like 2003, 4?
2003, 2004.
Yeah.
Kind of before the world was into comics. I would imagine it's hard to be in a school and find the one other person that's into comics these days, because I feel like it's so ingrained in pop culture now.
Yeah.
So and did you? When did the conversation come about, like creating? I mean, were you always writing, Lydia? I assume you've been doing art as long as you guys have known each other. How did the conversation lead to let's make a comic?
We were both in art class together because Evan does drawing stuff also. But at the time,
not that well, but yeah, I was in art classes when I was 16.
But I mean, we were applying for the Zarek grant at the time. We were like, we're gonna get this with our high school comic, which, I mean, it was a valiant attempt, but retrospect looking at it, I'm like, there's a reason we did not win that year with our first
yeah, we were like teenagers, and I don't know, maybe it's just because like I just knew Lydia was a really good artist when we were, I mean, I think everybody in art class knew Lydia was a good artist. Like
it's the only thing
yeah. Well, we weren't good at the math track. There were like kids who were in the math and science track, and we were in the art track, and we knew we weren't going to be in that. But like, for whatever, I think literally just started when we were teenagers, and I was like, I'll write something if you want to draw it, because I was trying to draw comics at the time, and I just wasn't fast, and I wasn't good. Like my standards were higher than my skill when I was a teenager, but I was like, if you drew it, it would be great.
And I couldn't write. People would always be like, I like the pictures, but they're like, I have no idea what's going on here. And so I needed someone who could write a cohesive
I don't know if you
story.
heard my dog in the background just barking like crazy, so I apologize. That's what distracted me there. I'm sorry about that.
No.
So when did Interdimensional become, or when did it was Bad Ink Studios the concept first, and then what do we want to do for our first book, or was it the idea for the book? Like what's the chicken and egg there?
Probably the book first, right? Like Interdimensional.
Yeah.
And then we came up with the print label later, as far as like, oh yeah, we need a little, print.
We need a logo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because like I don't think it ever was supposed to be. I don't know. It just everything that we've ever done has been very organic. Like, I moved to New York in like 2015 and was like, oh, Lydia lives here. Like we should catch up. And then it was like, hey, we should make another comic like the way we used to. Oh, it's actually turning out good. Oh, like we could publish this. Oh, we could put it on Kickstarter. Like it just sort of, it was never like, okay, the dream is to start a comic book publisher and, have a brand and all that stuff. It just sort of began with the art,
And we definitely took our time over the years as far as like side work in between jobs and stuff. And yeah. Right, so chipping away.
Well, I think you guys are. We're going to look at some of the art and work later and talk about it. But I think you guys are kind of onto something special, and both the product I think is quite good, but I also think, well, first of all, I think in the rich history of comics, you know, writer, artist, creative teams, you know, it used to be that's how all the best stuff was brought to us. And it's sort of a lost thing now. You know, from a point of like chemistry and working together and things like that, did you have to figure out how to kind of pass the ball back and forth, or did it come together really organically? And why do you think it's a model that, you know, a lot of times if you're an indie writer, you're trying to write and then you go try to hire an artist to draw your stuff, right? Like that's the indie path for a lot of writers, right? And then for a lot of artists, it's like try out and try to get in this thing and bounce this thing to this thing, right? And whereas like you can create something so much in your control and so much richer, I think, in that partnership. And I just wonder kind of that aspect of the experience for you guys.
I mean, I would say it's probably like being in a band, where it's like almost a relationship, but not really, in the way that you got to get along with the person. You can't just like, I think, work with any one random person long term. You're going to have to get along with them, like, kind of deal. As far as like how bandmates are still going to have to like operate together and like get along, you know, because you got to figure out how to talk and like communicate, like you said. So sometimes it's tough when you've got half your creation already. And like you said, you're just handing it off because you're just hoping like communications there, kind of thing. But
but like maybe it's just because we've known we've known each other for so long, we almost like had already learned how to communicate like that, because we literally like were in third grade or whatever, you know what I mean, like hanging out in art class in high school. It's like, I guess we kind of accidentally did a lot of that work, right? I never really thought about that before.
But it's just funny, just having to like trade stuff off. I mean, you got to be open to like, you know, someone being like, oh, I thought of this, or talking. But I mean, there's definitely not too much conflict between the two of us as far as he'll like either have like the first vague idea or get a first draft going. And then I'm like, oh, this made me think of this in this corner. And he like may or may not incorporate it. Same with sometimes my drawings, like he has some of his own edits and input. So I think it's definitely back and forth a lot. Like you hear about some people where they've got really strict defined stuff, almost like that Jodorowsky, like Dune, the making of movie, where he's talking about like how it works with people, you know. He's like with Kubrick, he wanted to coach the guy who did the spaceships for him, and like Kubrick was really like regimented and like knew what he wanted to do, and the spaceship guy's like, I do what Kubrick tells me to, and Jodorowsky's like, I want you to do something weird and like just do your thing, and the guy's like, well, like, I mean, I'm great, like, but give me directions. I don't know. I think both of us are just kind of like independently doing different arms, and we'll both check in or be like riff off each other's suggestions a lot. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of like inherent trust there. Like I'll literally write pages and I'll send them to you, Lydia. They're like a sequence where this happens over the course of however many panels, and we just need to see that this happens. Like it doesn't say like panel 1, this view, this angle, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, we'll definitely,
I don't know,
like,
we're just pretty natural.
And let a few drafts happen sometimes with different angles, like Evan's saying, where like a sequence might change a lot from the first draft because we're like, oh, we want this page to be more dynamic, and it'll go from like a kind of static page layout to something more disorderly or emphasizing action. Because I mean, we're just our own editors. That's the other thing. So there's just the two of us editing the different levels of like the work, or being like, oh, here's my impressions, or, you know, this looks funky, or do we have a problem with the storyline? Well, and I guess our significant others as well, reading the plot lines and being like, oh, this doesn't make sense here, or this looks strange, kind of thing. But
right, so you do have outside eyes that you use in the process as well to get kind of feedback for you.
Yeah, I definitely.
Others or
yeah, it's like the exclusive. You know, they don't have to sign NDAs, but
yeah, the inner circle.
Right.
We are pretty siloed, though. Yeah.
Yeah. But
so another thing that you were saying, so that's part of the frankly, of having essentially no editorial oversight too, right? Like this comic probably has a hard time coming to life if it's not you guys. I mean, we've spoken about this offline a little bit, but like the TikToks can have a lot of humor when you're promoting it, but like, you know, these are pretty bleak and pretty hardcore stories. And so if you're writing that stuff and then also saying like, and take as many paddles as you need to make this happen, right? Those confines are a lot harder to pull off when working under a specific publisher or editor, I would assume.
Well, I mean, Lydia knows this. Like you've worked, you know, within the confines of a certain project where you need to like you're more like tasked with a certain output.
Yeah.
I haven't really even worked inside the industry, you know, in that way, where I've never worked for a publisher where I'm writing under an editor. Like Bad Ink is my comic output. So I am appreciative of having no editorial oversight, and I don't even fully understand what a gift it is. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm just like vaguely aware of like, well, I guess we get to do whatever we want. Like this is cool, but I'm sure Lydia has a different perspective on that, having actually, you know, worked within the confines of that.
Yeah, even me, like I've only done like I haven't done as much main industry jobs. It's been more like I did stuff for Jessica Abel before she did a Trish Trash like Roller Girl of Mars comic that was published through Dargaud first in France, but she subcontracted me more, so I was doing layouts for her and like almost like Cerberus style with the backgrounds kind of thing, where she'd do like the main figures and she was doing the writing and stuff, and we'd collaborate on the layouts, and then I do the pencil backgrounds and ink backgrounds and stuff. But she was still communicating more with the editors first up, and it was like her as like a writer being an editor, so in that way it's slightly similar. But yeah, like some of the other times we're just subcontracting more, where you're just doing it for the artists or writers, or like working with Nick Bertozzi. I did some pencil work for him before. But it's funny with comics though too, just sometimes you end up doing the comic more straight up the first time and then presenting it as a whole to the publisher, especially when you're first starting out, you know, versus like just the proposition where you might be like launching a line that's more set up with a storyline. I feel like half the time they still want to see a little product. And then when we ended up just making our story, we were like, let's just keep going and just print it rather than try to shop it around. We're like,
I think that was like, yeah, maybe in my head, that was the intention originally, was like, we make this and then shop it around for someone to publish. But like the more we worked on it, I think the more we were just like, oh man, we're a pretty good team. Like between the two of us, we have like pretty much every skill you need to just do this, you know? Like we should just not introduce the element of somebody telling us what to do, because like it's so much better at every step to just be like, oh, it's now 27 pages. Like, oh, I guess we're going to have somebody's head exploding on this page. Like we just, I don't know. It just feels like it's an outlet for whatever we want to do. And that's like been really emotionally healthy, at least for me personally, and, you know, in my life.
And it's definitely the technology, like you had said before, with like the internet enables that. There's better like printing services you can connect to. Like when we first started in high school, Kinko's was the high end, cheap alternative. Right. But now at this point, the last time I tried Kinko's was like 2006 or 8, and the product quality was like terrible, and it was more expensive than just printing through like a print on demand service or doing small runs that way. And just at this point, having a website and selling direct to consumers rather than, you know, having to just, drive directly to every shop in your radius and do a consignment like half, you know, as far as like what you're getting paid per volume. And I mean, you know, we all know how much comic book artists and writers make, which is a ton of money.
Right. But a ton of money. It's the best get rich quick scheme there is.
Exactly. And I mean, this way we have all creative rights.
So yeah, I want to get into, I want to like just put a pin in what it's like as an indie comic publisher of your own work. I want to double back to it, but I do want to talk a little bit more specifically. So Interdimensional came first. So what was the inspiration for Interdimensional? Where did the idea come from? So I think there's an interesting story there as well.
I mean, I think we were just like not necessarily committed to just one story initially. We're like, let's just try this and we can always change it up. It doesn't have to be our like saga of be all end all kind of thing. And then I like doing different art styles. Like I was always really inspired by Becky Cloonan and Brian Wood's demo comic where she did like kind of different artwork in every issue, and definitely obviously heavy metal comics with all the serialized in like 2000 AD. But it gave us an opportunity to change it up each time and like keep messing around, I guess.
Yeah, the art variety is impressive. I kind of didn't really hit me until I was done reading that it was the same artist. Like it really is an impressive kind of like breadth of style.
Thanks, dude. And I mean, Evan did an amazing job coloring like the first story as well as the second issue. He did the whole coloring for that too, which that's an undertaking in and of itself, especially with doing the flatting as well as colors, not just like the fun part. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, the interesting thing about us is that we've always had the same interests, like science fiction, comic, like this, even the same taste in comics. I feel like we both liked Grant Morrison when we were 15 years old. You know what I mean? Like, and Charles Burns' Black Hole. Like I remember going to that exhibit with our art class, and we both were like, "Whoa, they have Charles Burns pages." You know, like we both knew of that kind of like that style was something we liked. So it really is like weird to say, but like I don't know that we ever said like, oh, we're gonna make a comic that's like this. You know, we let's talk about what the style is, or like what the tone of it should be. Like it really is just like, for whatever reason, I feel like very blessed to work with somebody who I'm just like, it's sort of like Ray Bradbury, and Lydia's just like, yeah, I know exactly what that is. Like, you know, I read this script and I know exactly like what it should be, you know?
But decidedly to go in the sci-fi vein, did that sort of predate like what it is? Like, it's like, we want to do a sci-fi X. Is that?
So I think we were kind of like a little bit, at least for the first story, we knew we wanted to do the sci-fi. It was just the aliens involved with like astronauts and stuff. But I don't know if we were like, it's going to be sci-fi magazine. Like, I'm not sure we knew our follow-up was going to be sci-fi, or that it wasn't. Right. I mean, it still kind of is weirdly changing, but that's also like heavy metal, like we said, isn't so much like just sci-fi. Like there's definitely horror and fantasy and like, you know, Conan vibes kind of running through as far as that.
And the decision to be an anthology. So was that early on, or did you finish an issue and go, okay, it wants to be this now?
I think it was the latter, right? I don't know. I think we knew that at least speaking for myself, I didn't want to commit to an ongoing series because it's like, we don't work like super fast. That's the other like benefit of being completely independent, is nobody's like telling you like, okay, like you have 20 days. Like, so it's like, okay, well, we know we can make a short story and we can get that done. Let's just finish that. And then it's like, well, do we want, I don't know. I don't think we were like, what an amazing universe. We're only ever going to do that. Like once it was done.
And I mean, we still aren't like averse to necessarily sequels down the line. I think we might do some stories at some point, revisiting or doing like side tangents, you know what I mean? Kind of like with like Orson Scott Card when he did like Ender's Shadow instead of Ender's Game, like where you caught a little side like characters like view and stuff like that. But I mean, it's not like necessarily happening like next issue, but I think we're going to do like mess around with some more like issues where I'll have a few stories sprinkled in there so we could have more stuff like revisiting the ideas and things. But I definitely always like changing it up, and sometimes we're just sick of a color palette by the end of it and we're like, no, next issue is going to be so different. Like we're going to do something different. Or for me, inking, I'm like, I can't draw any more trees. Like now we need to not have trees at all in the next issue, or dirt bikes.
I got so many trees. I know.
Yeah. But wait, in issue 2, I get maybe I was flipping this a little bit, the story, but like inspiration for the second issue was the sort of living tree bridge in Indonesia, right? Or am I?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
getting that wrong. So is it like, what's the next thing? What about this idea? Like, you know what I mean? Talk to me about sort of like,
random.
How does that sequence together?
Yeah, it's literally us texting, like it's mostly like news articles, like from the science section of like the New York Times or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like it'll just be like weird inspiration like that root bridge. And I had been reading like a tree book called like The Life of Trees at that time, and it's about the world. What is it called? The World Wood Web or something like that. It's about the root networks talking through mushrooms colonies, and about trees being alive. And then we saw that root bridge, and we were like, let's have living forest root bridge colony, and there's some bikers in there. Look, and then Evan had lived in the Pacific Northwest for a little bit, and
that's where I am now.
Like the what is it? The
Cascadian rainforest or something.
Yeah, exactly. Which I didn't know there's a rainforest in the Pacific Northwest, but there is. So
it really is. It's that natural though. It's like a game of improv. Like it's the yes and rule, and it's just like it's literally like as dumb as like yes, and also like all the trees will be connected. Yes, and also there will be people living in tree houses in the forest. Yes, and they'll use motorcycles.
Yeah, and we wanted like a colony because the first issue they were kind of like loner characters where like there wasn't as much of like I don't know, I guess a cast going on. So we wanted some more like people interactions kind of deal. But it's fun definitely covering the scope of it, like where it's bouncing along. I know some people they get annoyed at the anthologies, but I mean who knows? It could like be doing some illustrated man building a bigger thing or something like that, but we're keeping it open at the moment.
I don't know. I struggle for the words for it, but it feels decidedly punk, to be honest. And both in the way that there is you embrace a lot of old school tried and true things from both the art, the construction of story, the physical construction of it. You embrace new tools as you transfer from your inks and your pens into digital coloring and using with those. You know the rules and then you break the rules. And I think that's it's incredibly telling and then the book ends up feeling really vibrant and unique. And again, that sort of like two-person creative team does harken back to kind of like a golden era of and I don't mean the golden era, I mean like of generative forces creating new characters. So why don't you get, because we're like talking all around and I realize like, right, the audience hasn't read this yet. So what's like the most basic elevator pitch for Interdimensional? And then I'll pull up some art and we can talk about it.
What is the elevator pitch, Lydia? I don't know. I feel like we practiced it at the con.
We know it's
tabling.
I mean, it's definitely short story science fiction. They can stand alone. You can read them out of order. The first one's about an astronaut stranded in like a random alien world and him having to deal with the alien civilization that lives there. And then Ecomat, the second story in that, is about an alien in a kind of, I guess, alien and arcade, but they're kind of more human and basic human skills going into some like acid trip style, like weird painterly
you made
pages.
Me so uncomfortable in a good way. I really like that.
Yeah, and I was like, by the way, I was like, that story's gonna go faster. Painting will save us time, and then it took just as long. But I was like, I'll spare Evan some colors. And then issue 3 is a post-apocalyptic.
Or issue 2.
Issue 2. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, post-apocalyptic
story 3
in the Pacific Northwest, fighting mercenaries over water. But
it's like if I had to give like I feel like that's like that's exactly right. Like that's what the stories are. And it's like what I like about it is that someone can dislike the first issue and be like, I don't know, that was like very intellectual. I don't know if that's my kind of science fiction. And then they can read the second one and be like, whoa, like this has motorcycles in it. Like I like that it's exactly the feeling of picking up an old issue of heavy metal and everything is super different. Like I feel like without meaning to, we're really bringing back something that existed and worked really well and everybody forgot about, which is the like anthology, high quality science fiction comic that you can miss an issue of and still enjoy the next one. And you can always sort of be challenged as a reader and it's very clear that people are like experimenting and sometimes failing. Sometimes the less famous heavy metal stories, I'm like, well, they tried, you know. And I feel like we don't have like a fear of failure because we have absolutely nothing to lose. Like we have no
swings.
Yeah.
And
so I think
great.
that what you're feeling is that feeling coming across from us of just being like screw it, like we're gonna do what we want, and if someone likes it, great, and if not, there's another one coming, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, that's
I agree. And
like just enabling that small crowd like kind of thing. Like, I mean, as far as helping us launch the campaign in the first place and stuff. And I mean, it's like what Kevin Smith seems to be doing right now with his movies is just like, all right, I'm just gonna crowdfund and make some weird plot lines if I want to, and just like, I mean, saw Tusk, that movie was out there, but but
no, I just heard an interview with him recently, kind of talking about that fact. Like he knows how lucky he's been, and now he's got this ability to kind of do what he wants to do, and then like it'll play out or it won't. But his fans can be his fans, and he can make work that interests him. And I think that is partly what I'm still struggling to find the words of it a little bit. But I think what I found so appealing about reading the project, it isn't about like, oh, I love that story. I love that story. I loved the complete kind of ownership of the sandbox you got, you were creating, the sort of like, it's going to go in this direction or this direction, and we're going to swing big, and it's unapologetic. And, I would love to see more of it in the landscape broadly. That's kind of how I feel. I'm going to try to pull up some panels. So the mini introduction. So I stumbled across Evan on TikTok, the only positive social media tool. That's what I think. And what I thought was so great about the account is, while he was showing off panels and certainly promoting the work, between doing goofy things, was also like letting the audience in on process a little bit. It wasn't guarding the secrets, it was sharing them. And I thought, Evan, you're so kind of thoughtful about, again, like knowing the rules and making decisions whether to follow them or to purposely break them. And it's really an educational follow, I think, for anyone creating in any kind of medium. But I wanted to pull up some panels that I know you've talked about, and maybe you can both speak to them a little bit. So let me see if I can make this work. All right. Wow, that worked. Good job. So this is a early. I don't know what you do or don't want to say about the story for people who haven't read it, but talking about, you'd spoken a little bit about sort of cinematic aspects of this kind of double framing. Can you talk to me about that, Evan?
Yeah, and I'm sure Lydia, I'm sure Lydia can chime in too, because I don't even remember whose idea it was to use like essentially a match cut. Like, I mean, this is the way I talked about it on TikTok is that it's a cinematic tool. I think we're as influenced as much by film as we are comics. Certainly in terms of like these kinds of things where it's like, well, how would a 70s or 80s movie get you from a flashback to the present? Well, they'd probably just use like an almost forced match cut where it's like everything's the same view and the same body position, but the background changes,
Exactly. And I mean, we did the panel borders a little too, because we had the first sequence where it's back in time. So you've got the thin to thick panel borders, because sometimes I like to play with that, kind of denoting one's time or existence or another, whether it's like waking and dreaming or past and present kind of thing. Like, how sometimes with comics they got like no borders for a flashback and it's all misty and like dreamy kind of thing. But yeah, we wanted them to just, and also with him aging, so you can recognize him and know it's him in the future.
Yeah, because he's the narrator, so there's a lot actually that has to happen narratively. That's a good point, because I had forgotten that like we have to the reader has to understand that this person who's wearing a completely different color, where you can't even see the same hair color because he's wearing the helmet, is the same person back in time. So you have to get like super tight on your like your narrative structure to be able to like have people understand that like, whoa, this person has changed a lot, like a lot of time has passed, but it is the same person.
Exactly.
I also just like want to point out, like Lydia, you should take credit for like a really smart decision here, which is like super subtle, which is that it's a match cut, but there's still like that comic book, like Will Eisner-esque, like slight advancement of time where his one arm is back and then in the next panel it's in his lap. Like it's like the same movement of sitting down and putting your hands in your lap, but split across time. It's really cool.
Like continuous narrative almost. Well, I was also going to say for you, Evan, with the color, it's complementary too with the blue and orange too, as far as like past self, current self kind of thing, as far as like opposite color wheel kind of choices, which that was always the thing too, was the color choicing going on. As far as we kind of played with secondaries a lot for this issue, with Vic, the main character, with the orangish gold and all the like aliens being purple yellows kind of thing, like standing off each other. But we definitely a lot by the film cuts for sure. Like,
and the color palette is almost like another character throughout all three stories. I mean, you guys really put a tremendous focus on that in a surprising way, and often runs counterintuitive, I think, to what I might read in, I don't, mainstream's not even the right word, but like in like big two comic worlds, and yet doesn't feel alien. It just feels, fundamentally different. I'm going to skip one panel because I want to continue talking about color for a second. We'll come back to that one. So talking about color, our all red panel, you've spoken a little bit about the idea of coloring, right? There's the literal coloring, but then there's the sort of emotional coloring of a palette. Can you talk to this panel a little bit?
I mean, this one I was always inspired by what's his name, J.H. Williams III, his Desolation Jones. He did a lot of like cool, like emotion panels like this, where we're just seeing red, and everything would be just monochrome red like this. And I mean, especially with battle scenes, the seeing red gets a little literal, I guess, but you can always get so much emotion coming through. And I mean, Evan doing the coloring for the comic himself, like, it was your choice for a lot of those.
I don't remember. Sometimes we talk about that kind of stuff beforehand. Like you will reference something like that and we'll be like, oh, it'd be cool. Like I'll just send you a screen grab of like my screen when I first start flatting out the colors.
Yeah.
And I'll just be like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if this is working, and then we'll just text back and forth. Like, you could just make it all red again, because that always looks good. So sometimes it's like we plan it and sometimes it just sort of happens. Like,
I just remember it vignetted there, but I think Evan might have made the choice here for the all red on this like page. And I mean, the panel before it might have preluded it too a little bit. I forget if there was some like hint of it.
Yeah, I think there's like, you're right. There's like a panel before this that's like the thing that leads to like blood dripping off the wrench is a red panel. So it's almost like finishing that little mini narrative arc. But it's like, I don't know. I've talked about it on the TikToks, but like, it's amazing how much when the coloring matches the emotion of the scene, like, it's amazing how much it doesn't stand out. Like if you read our comics and then I was like, so how many if I told you like there were 6 all red panels and where were they? I don't think people would even, I think they'd be like, oh, there were 6. I didn't even notice, it's just like your brain just turns off and you completely accept it,
Exactly.
And that's a little bit what I'm speaking about when I talk about it. Like it runs counter to, I think, what we are used to seeing, but doesn't feel off. It actually feels on because you're sort of letting the emotion lead to the decision, right? So if we're in the throw of the story and we're connected to the story and what we're experiencing, it doesn't even, you don't stop and go, oh, look at that red page now.
Yeah. And it's definitely like kind of also bringing up film stuff, kind of like Dario Argento's like horror stuff, where you'll just get a sudden like wash of like old school lighting, you know what I mean? Where it'd be like a colored bulb or gel kind of thing. Like it sort of feels like that too, with using that emotion to like tell just like a story real quick with the coloring or selection kind of thing. And I mean, even some movies now too, they'll do that with restricted palettes where they'll push blues, you know, to have some like colder, spooky scene kind of thing. Even if it's not like how comics are literally painted, like selected in, you know. I feel like they'll definitely push that with the palettes for a lot of things. And even when it's like 300 or something and it was bleached down, you know, and like restricted to kind of like look like the watercolor palette in the comic, it was still that kind of storytelling with the coloring.
Yeah, it's like another example of how we're very much, I mean, film and comics have always inspired each other. Like I'm always interested in like, you know, finding out when creators from back in the 70s or 80s went to go see like some Cronenberg movie for the first time. And that's why, you know, Doctor Strange suddenly got really violent for like 3 issues. And like, I feel like we're a good example of like how film and comics have always inspired each other back and forth. And like, I'm watching, yeah, like Lydia said, like film with all these color grading tools that you have access to now. You can control the color of every scene. And I'm watching film start to do comic techniques of like using these kinds of color decisions. And then we're then taking some of that back from film and putting it back into our comic. It's an interesting back and forth for sure.
Yeah. It's funny.
Well, comics always fill the void. I mean, not fill the void. That's not the word. But they are like a bridge between film and the written word, right? So whereas you're leading the eye to assume the action between the panels and things like that, so it's splitting the difference. It does stand to reason too that like elements that are succeeding in both formats could inform each other certainly. Talking about techniques and tools and things like that. So I'm going to go back a panel here. Talk about the hand lettering versus using, you know, the digital tool and why for noises, for sound effects.
Yeah, I mean, one of the disadvantages I'd say, because we almost considered at the beginning doing the whole thing hand lettered too, but then you can't edit the writing as you go and tweak stuff. You're sort of like bound to how much room it takes up, or keeping it separate can be a difficult kind of thing. And with Evan being the writer, he also took on the lettering job, which another massive undertaking, but that at least enabled him to like do edits as he wanted to. But the sound effects, sometimes I would end up doing more weird, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like automatopoeia kind of, you know, vibes off of them, where you get a lot of visual representation. Like I always liked like Paul Pope's like Batman year 300, what was it? Like where he get like some of his sound effects like filling the whole panels and stuff. Like, and with this alien world, their sound is a big thing through this issue, so it felt like it was a character almost in and of itself. Like with them.
Yeah, this is like all Lydia. Like I am, it's such a gift to be able to work with someone who actually like, because you've actually done lettering jobs. Like you've done you know, freelance hand lettering, signs, stuff. Well, I don't know if they're signs, but that world of like typography, you know?
Yeah, and then I did some like lettering stuff recently for another friend's actually like small comic, this Diabolic LLC. They do this Dario Bava thing, but doing the sound effects is always fun for that. You just get really like emotive and stuff. And with these, like getting to have them on the page, I think made it easier for it to color too. And Evan also had a workload because he did different speech balloons through this issue too, where like aliens had a different like text going on and like outline to it and everything. But I mean, with the sound effects too, it's fun to be able to like manipulate it more than you would be able to with a font, or it might take way longer to try to get the same effect through like liquefying a font or messing with it than just drawing it by hand on the page. I don't know.
Yeah, it like counteracts the digital. Like doing the sound effects this way is so much more alive. Like you're right, you can't achieve this digitally. Like I remember when we put up that TikTok talking about how we hand letter sound effects, there were all these kids in the comments being like, well, there's got to be a way to do it in Illustrator. And I was like, I don't think so. Like I don't think you can do it.
I mean, maybe, but you'd be like sitting there, you'd just be drawing it with the pen tool. You know what I mean? Like vectoring it along, and ultimately I'd probably still sketch it on paper and scan that and then skin it with the pen tool. Like, because the times I've done lettering jobs that I want to vectorize, like that's how I end up doing a little bit of hand drawn or even if I'm using a tablet or something under the sketch. But I mean, it's funny with the hand like lettering techniques. I mean, even a lot of digital stuff, like it's all based on the old school techniques. A lot of people get weird about one end or the other, and we try to use a lot of like old school elements as well as digital elements, and it's all just drafting, you know. Mm-hmm. It's like sometimes it feels like Amish people arguing over like the compass versus like being high tech, you know what I mean? Like it's like back in the day, like that's technology, and now the computers, new technology, and like we've got the light box, the scanners, like they're all just stepping up. Like honestly, when I went to SVA, I took a class like in digital coloring my senior year, and the teacher, it's funny, she's like now the editor of like DC Comics, like Marie Javins, but she was like coloring at the time, and like she taught us all the coloring techniques she learned when she was first coloring, and it was all on paper with Dr. Martin's like mock-up concentrate watercolors. So it was all their color recipes where you're like eye dropping like the percentages for like Fantastic Four, and she's like, you want the percentages right because you're sitting there like being like, okay, 20% this, 30% this, and you're following a recipe, like, and you're painting it on the page. And now in Photoshop, you know, you're just doing your selections and using the CMYK sliders. And but it's funny with that history, like building on it, and now, you know, you have like iPad. Like, yeah. I mean, Evan definitely having to like wrestle the color stuff. And I mean, now they're like, he uses a lot of the zip tone stuff too, to like emulate the old processes and like.
What is zip tone is what? Sorry.
Oh, it's like the dots and the like the cross hatching kind of stuff. Like
oh, okay.
Halftone, zip tone. Yeah.
Got it.
But like the computers they have a lot of stuff emulating that now. But originally with comics, you used to have to like knife it out of contact paper and like glue it on the comic sheet for like the black and white like comics and stuff, you know, and your glue would dry over years and little flakes would fall off and stuff. And like,
it is weird. Like we are kind of like we are 90s kids, so we just inherently, I think, when we were like growing up, like when I first started trying to draw comics as a kid, I went to the art store and bought like all that stuff. I bought like contact paper with like halftone patterns on it that you had to X-Acto out, and a bottle of India ink and a dip pen and a watercolor brush. Like that was what the books that I had were telling me to do, because they had been published in like the late 80s and it was the 90s. And so like we are like we really are like a weird convergence of like analog and digital tools. Like everything we do, even if it's digital, is very aware of like the history, I think, of comics. It is a kind of a weird convergence in that way.
Yeah. And it shows up in whether consciously or subconsciously, I mean, it shows up in the subject matter as well, the convergence of analog and digital, right? Our tree bridges and our motorcycles and our psychic powers and our computer screens, right? So let me jump ahead here. All right. So this one I just picked up because like, come on. Like, this is just gorgeous.
Thanks.
Can you talk to me about the creation of this particular page, and also kind of the panel work of it all, which I think is in the next one I'll show. Also talk about panel work a little bit, but like again, having rules, breaking rules, doing it a way that you feel is what the story needs rather than what the convention calls for.
I mean, this one I think was one of those that went through a lot of iterations as far as us going back and forth with the panels. And I think it had a few different layouts that were much more basic at first. And then that eye shape started to emerge. With the painting, everything, it's tough sometimes with the deliberation. You sort of have to have it laid out a lot first. I didn't really use much like white ink or anything. So you're sort of like, okay, here we go. But the
white is paper. I just like to point that out. Like the white on this page is paper. Which is insane.
Yeah, I had them like taped to the like drawing board and was just building it up with like ink washes as far as like kind of watercolor idea. And this I hand lettered too. So if this was actually like nib, like dip pen and stuff. We cleaned it up a tiny bit afterwards, which Evan was nice enough to help out with that. But most of this was all just hand lettered on the paper. So Evan also had the joy of nailing the script beforehand because it was just committing to the like this weird fever dream. Like,
I mean, the script was really vague. I feel like I feel like the script didn't give any direction about like camera angle or size and
all
frame.
like upshot or something, but I mean that was just I think when it came to you, like, or you felt like it was dependent for the action.
Yeah, like
notes
sometimes I think it was there. I think like this page I was just like, she's breathing the clouds like smoke, now she's huge, now she's in space, now there's a DNA strand. Like it was really just giving
like,
you, I mean, I think I was just trying to give you permission to go crazy on it, you know?
yeah, you had like the pacing of a lot of the sequences, and sometimes for the most part he'd give like the panel breakdown of like panel 1, but he wouldn't necessarily say like tiny panel or like take up this much of the page kind of thing. And I mean, like, this whole sequence is really weird and out there, so the initial part of the story we tried to set up in more regimented like panel grids so it feels more normal, and then when she goes into the game, like everything's just sort of like out there and melty, and kind of we wanted to like play with micro and macro like kind of vibes going on for her feeling like a god or omnipotent like through the game, or you know, like kind of how it is with a video game where you're able to like manipulate different like elements like while you're looking through the screen kind of deal. But yeah, it definitely took a lot of like revisions and me having to like step back and go through phases. I think I did a first wave of the comic with just one pass all the pages, and then tried to go back for a second wave just to unify everything and have a chance to like step back from this. But this I also wanted them like moving the whole page around, so you have to twist the page to read it and flip it upside down. And I think that was actually inspired by some I want to say some Nick Fury layout like back in the day.
Oh, like an old
Steranko.
Steranko one?
Yeah.
It was Steranko, and it's like him like battling an octopus or something. I don't know. There was this weird thing during like art school I saw, but where you had to like twist the page around while you're reading it kind of deal. Which I know with digital must annoy some people because you're like training your
the iPad is like auto flipping it while you're trying to like turn.
Exactly. And
so when you say this when you say this goes through revisions, but there's a lot of paint technique going on here, correct?
Yeah, I mean the revisions are like a little bit of white ink here and there, or like darker ink, I guess. I don't think I cut out any paper and like pasted in a panel, which would have happened if need be kind of thing. But no, I like sketched them first with pencil and tried to make as many mistakes in the pencil stage as possible. And us figure it out and kind of like, okay, here we go. I'm going to start inking these kind of thing. But
well,
yeah,
and Lydia is a really good layout artist too. Like I feel like the other part of your process that's really impressive is that you take the time to like do roughs and like several versions of like where you do like a thumbnail rough that's like, I don't know if you did it for this one, but for a lot of our stuff you do like super tiny, like super loose thumbnail roughs, and then you'll make a rough layout and then you'll start to pencil, and those are 3 different things, you know?
Exactly. Like I learned that the hard way in art school because I felt like then I was like, oh, I was really into inking and I didn't do much penciling, and I'm like, oh, I just do it in the inking stage. And then there were so many awful revisions of having to cut stuff out or just slaughtering things with white ink. It was just bad. So then I started just getting into more like some teachers that said just making the mistakes in your pencil stage and enabling you to just figure it out more with the story then. And then it's just nicer to ink because then you're like, oh, you can just cruise and enjoy it, and you're not stressing out like wondering if it's the right angle or not because you've been able to see the whole page together. And sometimes like it would influence things, like either the writing, Evan might like change some angles, or when we had it all drawn out we were like, oh, that looks kind of weird, and then sometimes we change a page layout anyways, but it's less painful when you haven't like inked.
Yeah, like when you send me like when you send me rough page layouts, it's so much easier for me to be like, you know, her head looks really big on, you know, in this panel, and it's like, great, we'll just change that when you go to pencils, because like we're just looking at like rough layouts, you know, it doesn't matter if you have to redo it because you have to do it again anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Because when the drawing's too nice, it's hard to like cut it later. It's easier to just cut it and be brutal in the beginning when it's wispy and you're like, okay, I get how the storytelling's happening and stuff like that. And then the pencils have to like kind of render out and then get all the proportions right and stuff. But it's definitely good with the check-in waves that way. And then sometimes like Evan can start doing the text on top of the layouts anyways, because they're proportionate enough. So he can get a head start on like putting the speech bubbles in and then just drop the background picture later and swap it out.
And so talking about panels, let's talk about panels. What's my question here other than tell me about panels? It's so the decision to break from traditional panel structure comes from where and when? Like, is it like, do you go into the page going like, this wants to be all over the place, literally falling off our page? Or is it like, I need this event to happen? What makes that, like, how does it evolve into what I'm seeing?
Probably primarily the event of like, based on the script, like what the sequence needs to happen over the page, like is first dictating it. And then the panels will emphasize the actions at hand. Like you said, like the tipping and falling is sort of like her uncertainty is it's like going through the panels and stuff. But it also helps sometimes to have a little bit of normalcy with the panels because it'll give you more contrast for when they get weird. Because I used to just have every page too weird sometimes, and then there's no fun, you know? It's like watching like too choppy a movie where if everything's intense, you're like, okay. But if you have a little prelude, then it's got that contrast between like the pacing and stuff. But it also helps, I feel like
that's such a good point, by the way. Like just real, like you just made me realize something, which like I don't know, I'm just amazed. I'm sorry to cut you off, Lydia, but like it's such a good point. Like I'm amazed more comic creators have not figured that out. Like I don't know why when I pick up like, again, like I don't want to say mainstream, but like a big 2 comic, like I don't know why they're not contrasting panel styles more. Like I don't know why when there's talking in a diner, it's like it should be like super regimented panels, and then when there's a fight, it should be insane. But I feel like they don't play with the layouts enough. There's not enough contrast, you know?
Yeah, because I always wanted to use kind of splash pages in college, and then like a couple of teachers were like, "No, like use the splash page for the splash, like when you want the punch. Like if you use it all the time, then you're not gonna have that impact." And I mean, like I just like doing weird panels too because you can fit certain actions. Like for me, sometimes it's really hard to fit stuff in like a 9-panel grid. Like if you go old school and basic, like you'll have big action, like old school action comics. You know what I mean? Like Superman original stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hard to fit big action in a little panel every time, or to fill a big panel with boring action. I mean, sometimes like you're breaking up a talking head sequence, and then it's like the Jack Kirby thing where it's fun to zoom out to different angles and be like close up, medium shot, long shot, like keep it diverse on the page. I don't know. I feel like manga was always good with that a little bit, although half of theirs like is emotion backlines, like kind of thing, like all the emanata going on.
Manga's like a good reference. I think we're like accidentally influenced by manga too. Like manga does a better job of these kinds of layouts, like, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Breaking grids and like having panels be dictated by emotion and like, you know, if somebody's punching upward, they'll just draw a really long skinny panel, you know, or they'll have their fist busting out of the top of the panel. Like we're not like always influenced by manga consciously, but I think we both like it, and that energy comes into it.
I you know what, I don't know this to be true, but you know, that question, Evan, that you just presented of like, well, why don't I see them in the main 2 or, you know, the big 2 or whatever as much? And I think there are a couple of different reasons for that, but honestly, I think one of it is just you guys need to give yourselves the credit and the way you're thinking and approaching the craft. I just honestly think that there aren't, not that no one else is doing it. Certainly there are incredible artists, writers thinking this way. But a lot of times people aren't kind of putting themselves through the paces of thinking about the story they're trying to tell and how to maximize that experience for the readers. It's more, all right, here I got, and some of this is going to be just the corporate pressure of, we got to move the Marvel storyline, we got to move the DC storyline, like get me from A to B, right?
Not just that, but the schedule too, because I mean that's part of our like indulgence with the time, like taking the time to do all these things. Like if we were like getting this out within a month or so, like even if we gave ourselves 2 months because of just being a 2-person team rather than just say doing like one task a month or something like that, we might not have all the indulgences of.
Yeah,
Right.
actually, that's true. Like, I don't, because I definitely don't want to like insult all the like people who are working in like the mainstream industry, because I know that there's like really talented people. But you're right. It's like we're pretty indulgent in how long we take to do things. I think if you told me that we had to produce a book a month or every 2 months, like you said, like I don't know that we would do this. You know what I mean? Like, I think we would just be like, no way. Like, we don't have time. You know?
Right.
Yeah. Like if you showed us this product and you're like, this in a month.
Like, we'd be like, no.
And I want to be clear, I'm not attacking on talent at all. More the approach to deliver those talents. There's something about the sort of the thinking about the influence and what you want to tell, and it's the ownership of it, right? It's your stories. There's that part too, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So
it's hard. Just being like, oh, we're just gonna make like the weird stories, and it's not like worried about a brand or like what's our overall image as a company, or like that's a little weird over there. Like we're just gonna happen, or like that guy's gonna die. Yeah. It's gonna happen. Like, I mean, it's not like it's being released.
What was the decision to be oversized? By the way, sorry, I meant to ask that earlier. To be kind of magazine size.
Of drawing too big and too many details. I'm like, we'll cut
Sorry,
those margins. Oh, I just said probably a bad habit of mine from drawing too big on the page, or drawing for the bleeds and then liking all the details, and you're like, we'll just add those details and just make it a bigger print.
We'll just keep the bleeds in.
Yeah, like, I mean, it really is that. It's another example of us having literally no one telling us what to do. Like, I feel like you just drew the first issue in like the wrong aspect ratio. Like, it wasn't narrow enough.
Like
that was like one thing, right?
The live area fit, but then I just couldn't trim any of the part that should have been trimmed. I was like, oh, well, I like how it looks on the page. Like, I just indulged too much. And it's because I work on 14 by 17 page half the time, so I could do bigger bleeds instead of an 11 by 17. So it's just easy to spill out a little more. And then from then on, we're like, okay, I guess this is our aspect ratio now. And just and
you can always be like, well, Heavy Metal magazine is big. Like, that we just always go back to like, you know, like you can pick up an old issue of Heavy Metal and it's the size of ours. So we must be doing something correct, because we're just imitating the greats, you know?
Exactly. We're doing the Euro thing, like all the humanoids and that scale. Larger.
But Heavy Metal kind of fell away because Heavy Metal felt, I think, a little culturally outdated. You're finding what was a very successful format and sort of visual freedom and delivery style, and giving it current sensibilities.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like a lot of when we say heavy metal is a lot of the like early heavy metal and like the Metal Hurlant stuff, where it's just like you had said, that kind of punk and like zine kind of feel, where they're just making like out there comics that they wanted to make, and the storylines are kind of bizarre. Like all the Enki Bilal stuff is awesome, and some of the Jodorowsky and like Mobius things, where they're just doing like storylines that maybe like if you just pitched them to the average person, they're gonna be like, that sounds bizarre. Right. I don't know about that, but you know, it plays out awesome. You see the actual artwork like on the page in front of you. And I mean, even like how Sin City got serialized when it was first coming out, where it was like 6-page installments or so, like just coming out in like magazines and stuff, like building up. I don't know. It's funny with just the format.
Sorry. I'm going to jump us forward to the next slide. A couple more slides and then a couple questions. I'll get you guys out of here. You've been very generous with your time. I appreciate it. So talk about getting a reader in. So this is the first page of the second issue, correct? Yeah. And you were talking a little bit about like your splash pages for splash pages. So what, you know, the decision to open on this kind of a first page comes from where?
I mean, I don't know. I will say, and something that I just realized as we're talking, I don't even know if Lydia knows this, but every issue we've done has first come to me as the first page. Like the very first thing that I see in my head for every issue we've done, including this new one, issue 3, which we're working on, is the opening splash. Like that, I can like in my head see the whole page. Like we will have already talked about the story and the influences and what we want it to be and like the vibes and the art style. But when, like we've already decided like the world, but when I am like, okay, I need to sit down and write the script, the first thing that I see is usually the opening page. Like what's the, like, how can I tell you the full story in the opening page? And for this one, it was this came to me as one image that told you everything. Like there's forests, people are up in the air, they're using bikes, this character is injured, which ends up being like the main thrust of the plot. Like I can tell you everything in one image. And same thing with the first one, the very first panel of the first issue, the previous issue before this one, same thing, it like came to me all at once. It's so weird.
It's awesome that they get set up that way. I always liked like when the stories would start just right in the action. Like, I mean, as far as, you know, you can always go back for preludes if you want to, but just starting in the thick of whatever your main plot line is always just seems to help, where you're just like, you're there, you're in it, like you're just thrust into like whatever the main character is like seeing at that point in time, or introduced to like the first person, you know. And I think like I enjoy doing a lot of stuff with the backgrounds and stuff. So Evan's like script usually will try to incorporate a lot where some of the world building, like you try to see some of the aspects like there where, you know, a blank background wouldn't serve us as well, unless that's part of the punctuation, I guess, as far as someone sailing through the air. But with her living in like the tree forest and stuff, you know, like all the canopy and stuff, and getting the dirt bike in there initially.
And you've got this, it's a static image, I don't know what's going on, whatever, and yet there's this, just as you look at it, it's a real kind of vertigo sense of movement that you feel that falling going on, which both is obviously very compelling, but also kind of establishes this the literal kind of high wire act of the majority of the story as they're riding these bikes across the tree branches and stuff like that. Is there anything visually going on? I mean, is it, maybe it's the camera angle, but that adds to that sense, like you really feel that fall coming at you.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to like emphasize in that shot. I think we both like playing around with like the up shots and down shots and trying to get some emotion like with their choices and angles. So having her like being a little off kilter and it like zooming down, tried to get like the speed going and saw the shrapnel and everything around her. And yeah, getting that full splash page where you get to see every detail instead of trying to fit it in a little panel and being more
well, that's Jeff Darrow. That's the Jeff Darrow influence. Like I know that as kids, we both liked Jeff Darrow a ton.
Exactly.
And like if when Jeff Darrow draws a car accident, he draws like every piece of the engine. Like he like looks up like how an engine is built, and he draws like every single accurate piece coming out of the car, you know?
Like there's 8 bolts there. 8 bolts are going to be flying through the air. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, it's funny since like learning how to ride like motorcycles and dirt bikes, it's hard not to like just put the parts in. And we had them all like salvaged for Mad Max, so they like half exist. And like we're like, all right, we're going to just draw this stuff. It's just easier than making it up sometimes when you just have it all illustrated out
that's
there.
I think that's the secret though of a lot of like why the pages work, is that Lydia has such a good sense of perspective and also a really good eye for detail. And like when you combine like extreme perspective with a lot to look at, like a lot of the storytelling is done instantly, you know, like it just immediately communicates that it's like a rich world. And then when you do that page after page after page, it's like there's a lot of style starting to like accumulate, you know, over the course of an issue when you have that much stuff going on every single page. And it does make it feel more immersive. It's that like it's a living world where we can put the camera wherever we want. The perspective can be crazy because we've accounted for all the places the camera could be, because like there's a lot of world to put it inside. And there's a lot of detail and thought behind everything, you know?
Exactly. And a lot of like Evan's writing, we tried to have like come through the backgrounds and the different elements where we can show, and just more opportunities for the storytelling, which is nice.
Well, if you're world building in one shots, you got to get a lot of world build into a fairly tight amount of visual storytelling. So
yeah,
all those kind of little elements help feed the information of, okay, these are the rules of the world I'm experiencing.
yeah. And yeah, those help with the insets then, because you've already gotten like the setup with that big location shot. So when you do want to peel some back, then you already have that kind of like in your memory. Like you've got sort of the world, like a little bit of a baseline and like taste for that, where it's easier to, I think, like immerse like within. But
yeah, we do a lot of stuff where if you read through our stuff, there's a lot of like, first we introduce a place with a really big panel, then we start putting the camera, like, so you know, yeah, you have a mental map of where everything is, and then the rest of the sequence is like the camera's in a bunch of really weird places, but it's okay because we always start with like the establishing shot. And that's another like film technique that is totally stolen from film. Like you show the wide shot of the planet and then you show all the people on the surface in different angles so that you're like, oh, right, they're on this planet and there's this weird thing that they're living in, but I've seen it first and now I can like exist inside that world, you know?
exactly. Like, and if anybody ever wants to get into like making comics or comic storytelling, Scott McCloud's like How to Do, I forget the exact title, but Making Comics by Scott McCloud. Like he's great about doing those setups about how humans just infer sequential storylines through like the setup. Like you have a picture of a woman, you've got a picture of a boat, you got a bird, like you're building a storyline in your head just by being like, that woman, she's gonna be on the boat, like they're associated. Just, like, how you like make choices.
Well, Scott McCloud will link to you in the show description.
Yeah, he's good though with like a whole old school, like a weird indie approach where it's not just like the Marvel's way, like to tell stories and stuff. But yeah. But
so my last panel is less about what's going on in the story and more about being an indie creator in today's day and age. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there are a lot of people drawn into this that were Kickstarter contributors. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or was that a different panel?
No, that's this one for sure.
That's this one, right?
Free cameos. Yeah.
So to what extent, and I don't know if you want to talk about this panel specifically, I can pull it out or anything, but it's more just, so to what extent is the right, the flip side of having the total control and all the editorial freedom is that, you know, you're the entire hustle, right?
Yeah.
So
yes,
what's life like for the independent comic creator these days? I'm gonna pull this out of here and let's get that out.
I mean, sometimes it's fun with some of this. Like, I like making the merch and like designing it. And I'm sure if we worked for a company, they'd be like, that's the merchandising person's job. Like, you are not designing all the stickers or like deciding which rewards tiers are going on. But I mean, even the cameos, like, yeah, they're hard to work in, but we wanted to also have them more than just like guy in background, like where you're just get like really bland cameo. So we kind of first sent out, what was the email you sent, Evan? You're like, do you want to die a bloody death, like in your cameo?
we were like, look, we got to hustle however we can to make our Kickstarter goal. So like one of our reward goals will be you get to be drawn into the comic. But then like Lydia said, like we wanted people, in order to raise the money and make it feel like people actually want to spend like however many, I don't even remember how much it was. It was like for us, it was like a big ask. It was like a couple $100 or something.
Yeah, it was like, I think something like that. And they got like the comic, they got all the physical rewards as well as like them in the comic too. You know what I mean? Like where it was like, they got the comic, all the stickers, the pins and all that stuff, the print.
But like, in order to make it feel like, hey, it's worth you giving some unknown creators like a lot of money, we really want to make your cameo worthwhile. Right. And so we were like, you know, it's not just like like Lydia said, it's not just like a background character. Like we can have you getting shot to death, like, which is what's happening to a lot of our friends in the comic. Like,
it's like the Western death of like, like, because if you're going to close up on someone, you know, half the time you read into it too much. So we're like, all right, they'll be part of the dirt bike tribe or the mercenaries. And like, Evan sent an email like, is gore okay? And some people are like, no, thank you. And so we're like, all right, we won't like kill them off in a crazy way. Like, we'll just have them like throwing
they're
grenades.
they're just riding a bike in the background because they didn't check the box that says like violent death or whatever. But
we had some friends,
but that was like that's like a lot of work though, like because that's a good example of like what it's like to be indie, because it's like, okay, I have to make the Kickstarter, you know, like we have to make the Kickstarter, we have to decide that that's a reward, we have to write up that description so that people reading our Kickstarter actually understand that they will indeed be getting to be in the comic. We have to send the follow-up email that says like, please send us your photo. We have to take those photos and sketch them up and figure out how to work them into the comic. It's just like, if you actually worked for a larger publisher, there would be some kind of resourcing person who would be sending those emails and dealing with the people side of it and getting them to sign off on it's okay for me to be killed. And so it's very exhausting to have to do every step of that process. And that's just like one tiny thing. I mean, you know what I mean? Like for every Kickstarter, there's like 20 rewards. So it's a good example of like how much hustle there is, for sure.
Yeah, and this time we might not do that reward, just because part of that too was having to wait to draw the next issue until we had like gotten the funding, and then like some of the time during pandemic spun out, and then it was later on the fulfillment. So this time we just want to draw it beforehand.
Yeah. We made the mistake of like kickstarting it and being like, pay us the money so we can make our comic. That was issue 2.
Exactly.
Issue 2 was like, yeah, like pay us and we'll make it. And then it was like, oh my God, like we made these people wait so long. So like the good part of that is we were able to draw people into it because it didn't exist yet when we did the Kickstarter.
Right.
The bad news is everybody had to wait for it. So this time for the issue 3, we're trying to get much farther so that when we do a Kickstarter, like when it closes, people don't have to wait that long to actually get the issue in the mail, you know?
We'll probably keep some of our other digital rewards, though. We did some digital portraits that were like, just get a portrait, a caricature, like commission done on the side, which those, aren't gonna.
Yeah, like not in the actual comic, but you just get to have your picture drawn, you know, to have. That was like a really good reward.
Right.
Yeah.
You guys make the rounds at cons at all?
We've been starting to, although like you always have to get the scheduling done like almost a year in advance. So just this last year or so, we started signing up for some more, and we're based out of the East Coast. So we've been doing the local circuit. Okay. We both have pets. It makes it tough. I won't lie.
Yeah. Leaving your dog at home while you travel to Baltimore Comic-Con or whatever it's tough. Like we're not a big company. Like we don't have, when we go to these cons and I see like the Boom Studios booth, I'm like so jealous that they have like, they hired some local, you know, fan basically, or like either a fan or an employee to man the booth and be excited about their work and talk to fans who come up to the table and stuff like that. So we are, I mean, again, to go back to the punk thing, like I have played in punk bands in my time. We're both fans of that type of music. And it's definitely that DIY thing of like, when I was in bands, I had to load the drum kit into the back of the van. And it's the same thing. Like we're packing up all our stuff and driving it to cons and emailing the organizers and being like, you didn't give us enough badges. There's 4 of us showing up to the table. And like, that's all us. So it's a lot of work, but it is really fun to control it, you know?
In a way, it makes it easier, I think, just that it is us doing it, like in that regard, that you're just like, all right, well, it's us. It's not like, oh, they're telling me to do this too. Like on top of
yeah, we don't do anything we don't want to, which is nice.
Right. That's extreme.
We don't go to any cons. We don't go to any cons we don't want to go to too. You know, like we only go to the ones where we really are excited about it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's easy to make executive decisions that way.
So tell me what you can tell me so far about the next issue, or if there's another. Are we focusing on Interdimensional? Is there another title coming out? Where are we?
We'll do the Interdimensional thing. I think the Batting Studios is partly if we ever do feel like branching out to other ones, we have that available. But for the time being, it's mostly Interdimensional for our header. But I mean, each issue will have like an ad section in the back and a little classifieds like fake out section. None of the ads are real. They're all fake.
Oh yeah, we always put like that's like a joke. Like,
that's interesting.
No, it's all like fake, like because we have no advertising. We have nobody who wants to advertise in our books. Like we
Yeah.
we make that into a joke. So every issue is like a story with fake ads in between, and like basically, you know, it's always the same format of like a short story with fake ads on, you know, and fake classifieds throughout, and then it's always like, so you feel like you get like a real substantial chunky thing, you know, full of pages basically.
Yeah, it was partly that, it was like almost like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy vibes, where that's just like in the universe, where we wanted our publication like actually some interdimensional comic magazine. So they're all just like fake alien ads and stuff like that, and there's like a couple Easter eggs for each like next issue's story that will have like an ad for like the storyline coming. So we have like one or two sprinkled in there, but I mean it's kind of this like dreaming hotel like kind of thing is our
yeah, it's like,
talk about.
I don't know how much we want to reveal, but like it is about it's I was like joking that it's like a Stephen King-esque story because it's a, I don't know how much we want to reveal. It's about somebody who goes, yeah, like it's about somebody who goes to a hotel where there is technology that allows your dreams to be customized. So when you sleep at the hotel, you have custom lucid dreams. Yeah. Okay. And the basic premise is almost like The Shining, but very updated for the modern era, which is that if that technology existed, it would maybe not be good for your mental health. That there are poor, you know, maybe it's good that we don't always control our dreams because there could be very poor decisions that are made subconscious. Like if your brain could design its own dreams, it might invent something wrong and not good for you emotionally.
Yeah, so we're following like a journalist main character. So they're going through like their initial experience there. But yeah, it's gonna be kind of weird. We're gonna actually play a lot with zip tone and stuff. We were reading a lot of like Junji Ito books as like kind of a preload to this, like because he does a lot of like horror short stories, and his stuff kind of fringes on like folksy sci-fi, you know what I mean, where it gets that like old school horror myth and legend kind of elements going on. But he's like really fine line style and use of like the zip tone and like half tones. We wanted to integrate with some black and white too, and again just to like mix up like the visual style from the last couple issues. Like we're gonna mess with
this one's gonna be like super different visually. Like I'd say like half of it is gonna be colored like manga, like Junji Ito, like in black and white half tones, and then the dream sequences are like very colorful and bizarre. So it's like intentionally a complete mashup of styles within the same short story, which will be really fun.
But yeah, and that wins layouts with, but so it's in progress. But
I look forward to checking it out. I want to thank you guys for your time. I will put links to all your stuff in the show's notes when it goes up, and there were a lot of references to a lot of different art resources and influences, and I'm going to try to maybe as I rewatch this see if I can tag to other things so viewers out there who may not be familiar with some of the influences you mentioned can check them out. I think that'd be great. So thank you very much, folks. Couple weeks. Be well, and we will continue to read Interdimensional.
Right. Thanks. Have a good one.
You got it.
Thank you so much.